In many parts of Asia, the night carries more than just silence. It carries stories, whispers, and beliefs that have been passed down for generations. People say that when the sun sets and the streets grow quiet, the world does not fully belong to the living anymore. Spirits, both restless and wandering, are thought to move freely in the dark, slipping between places where the boundaries are thin. Some believe these spirits are drawn to the tired or to those who wander late at night. Others warn never to take shortcuts through lonely roads or abandoned paths because you might meet something that is waiting silently there. In these stories, the scariest part is not always what the spirits do, but at the thought that they are there, watching you and lingering just out of your sight. And so, when a group of friends set out late at night to travel to a club to perform, far from the city, none of them thought about these warnings. The road ahead seemed quiet and ordinary, lined with forests and the occasional house. But as they drove deeper into the forest, the air grew colder and the shadows longer, and the silence heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. This is the story of the things that follows. The night was quiet when the four friends piled into their car. Their instruments tucked carefully at the back and their excitement mixed with the usual nerves that came before a performance. This is actually a music band, and they were set to perform in a club that is located in the outskirts of the city in Malaysia. Arif, who is the lead singer, took the front passenger seat, talking quietly with Hafiz, who would be driving. The other two remaining people in the band is Daniel and June, the bassist and the drummer. They both settled into the back of the car, stretching out and letting the warmth of the car lull them slightly, already tired from the long day of practice and packing. The road ahead was unfamiliar, winding through the stretches of forest and countrysides that seemed to grow darker the further they drove. The headlights cut through the blackness in the narrow beams, illuminating the occasional tree and the outline of a small empty house. The silence outside of the car was different from the city. There was no distant horns, no people walking past, and no signs of life whatsoever except for the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. And every now and then, a dog barked off in the distance, its sounds echoing strangely through the still night air, making the friends glance at each other without saying anything. As they drove, the forest pressed close on both sides, tall trees bending slightly over the road as if trying to block their path. There were stretches of the road where it curved sharply, and each time they turned, the dark shapes of trees would appear closer, almost moving in the corners of their eyes, and the friends would instinctively slow down, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Sometime later, the road began to change. The trees thinned and the occasional house appeared, dark and silent, with shutters closed and no lights in the window. There were no cars to be seen, no signs of movement, and the emptiness made the night feel heavier and more alive. Then, they reached the old cemetery, the kind that had stood there for decades, with gravestones leaning at odd angles and moss covering the edge of the stone. The faint outline of statues and crosses created shapes that seemed to shift in the headlights. Even though it was just a cemetery, there was a presence in the air, a quiet that seemed unnatural, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Inside the car, the friends tried to talk and laugh to keep themselves distracted. Arif hummed quietly under his breath. June tapped his fingers on his knees, trying to keep the rhythm alive after hours of playing music. Hafiz, who was driving, he tried to focus on the road, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching from the shadows, just beyond where the lights reached. And Daniel occasionally glanced out the window, and each time he thought he saw movement in the trees. His stomach tightened, and he quickly returned back to the conversation, pretending that he had not noticed anything. Despite the unease, they eventually reached the club. The music from the inside spilled out into the parking lot, and lights from the stage made the building look alive, warm, and welcoming. The tensions from the drive began to lift slightly as they unpacked their instruments and carried them inside, the smell of the smoke and fried food greeting them as the door closed behind them. The night outside, on the other hand, was dark and strange, and was left behind for a moment, replaced with the hums of voices and clinking sound of glasses, and the buzz of the small crowd waiting for the performance to start. Even as they set up and tuned their instruments, there was still an echo of the roads in their minds. The forest, the cemetery, and the shadows, those sights could not be forgotten so easily, and the uneasy feeling of being watched lingered, subtle but persistent, even in the bright and warm light of the club. It was the kind of night that promised music and laughter, but also whispered something unseen had followed them further than they realized. After their first set, the four friends took a moment to catch their breath. The room was warm and filled with the chatter of patrons and soft clinking of glasses, and the energy from the music still lingered in the air. Arif, the lead singer, wandered over to the bar, not out of thirst but out of curiosity, and found himself speaking with the owner of the club, who is a middle-aged man who seemed friendly, yet carried a small intensity in his eyes. Their conversation started off very casually, with Arif asking about the night and how busy the club had been over the years. And then, almost casually, Arif mentioned about the road that they had taken to get there. It was strange, he said, his voice lowering slightly as if sharing a secret. There were almost no houses, only the forest, and then that old cemetery. The whole drive somehow felt a bit off. I can't explain it, but it didn't feel normal, he said. The owner listened carefully, nodding as if he had expected this. He leaned back slightly, wiping his hands on a towel, and replied, "Ah, yes, that road. Yes, I know it well. That's the back entrance to the town. Not many people use it, and it has always had an atmosphere about it. It's not dangerous in the usual sense, but it's just not the road that you should take if you want a normal drive, you know." Arif had this confused look on his face, trying to picture the way he had driven, and asked, "So what the road should we take next time?" The owner's eyes darkened and his tone calm but firm. "There is this main highway, and it cuts straight through the town, passes a hospital, and is always well lit. It may take a little longer, but it is far safer and it doesn't carry the same weight that the back road does. Some nights, things linger there that prefer the quiet, and they watch anyone who passed through." Arif's stomach tightened slightly and he smiled, nodding to show that he understood. "We'll remember that, thank you." When he returned to the table, the others noticed the slight paleness in his face, even though he did his best to hide it. They laughed and joked about their performance, but the conversation with the owner left a quiet unease that settled into the pit of their stomachs. Even as they finished their drinks and prepared for a second set, the memory of the road, the cemetery, and the dark forest somehow stayed with them, hovering just at the edge of their thoughts. Later, as they packed up to leave, the club had begun to empty and the hour was late, around 2 or 3 in the morning. They knew the main highway was their road back, but none of them could completely shake the feeling that something from the back road had followed them, even if only in the imagination. But the night, which had begun so normally, still had a sense of watchfulness, as though the darkness outside was waiting to reveal itself again. The drive back to the city began with a sense of relief. Hafiz took the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly as he followed the main road, just as the club owner had suggested. The road was wide and better lit, with a bright light on the side, the kind of highway where you expect cars and people at all hours. Daniels and June, exhausted from performing, had already slept in the back seat, leaving only Hafiz and Arif awake in the front. And for a while, it felt as if the long night was finally easing into something ordinary. However, through the glow of the headlights, they saw her, a figure, standing in the middle of the road, and at first, they thought she might be another driver or a hitchhiker, until the details become clear. She was wearing a hijab, and her presence was unnatural in its stillness. She faced the side of the car, not directly looking at them, and her height was striking. She was tall, far taller than anyone would expect, almost 2 meters tall. and her silhouette seemed to stretch unnaturally under the streetlights. Hafez's hands tightened on the steering wheel and he blinked quickly, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice tense but low. Arif, who was in the passenger seat with him, leaned forward slightly and squinting, and then nodded. "Yes, I see her. She's tall." The car slowed down as they approached, their hearts beating faster, and then she raised her hands, almost giving them a sign that they should stop to pick her up or let her in. The sudden motion made both men startle and curse under their breath. Their breath come quickly now, and each heartbeat echoing in the tight space of the front seat. Hafez instinctively pressed on the accelerator, moving past her and unwilling to stop. As the car passed, Arif glanced at the rearview mirror and his stomach turned cold. The woman had turned her face towards them now, watching as they drove by with her expression hidden but her gaze unmistakable. And next to her, at an old empty bus stop, sat another figure, a man in an office uniform, a button-up shirt and slacks, as ordinary as someone you might be seeing waiting for the bus during the day. Yet, now it's completely out of place here, in the middle of the night, on this desolated road. Arif looked at Hafez, who was driving, and whispered, "Do you see the man in the uniform?" Hafez shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. "No, I don't see anyone," he replied, though the unease in his voice betrayed them. The rest of the drive was tense and silent. Neither of Hafez or Arif spoke much, and both were aware of the darkness pressing closer on the sides of the car, and of the faint rustling in the trees and the memories of the figures that had just passed. The streets gradually led them towards Hafez's house in the city, where the city lights growing stronger with each passing kilometers, and the sense of being watched lingered, faint but undeniable, like a shadow just behind their consciousness, following them quietly as they drove. By the time they reached Hafez's house, the tension had eased slightly, though the events on the road remained vivid in their minds. It was a night that felt longer than it should have been, and the memory of the woman in the hijab, along with the man in the uniform, was impossible to shake. Hafez parked the car and the four friends said their goodbyes, each aware that the night had changed something, though they were not sure what. After Hafez dropped him off, Arif called for a taxi to continue the journey home. The streets were quieter now, and with the only faint hum of distant traffic and occasional barking of a dog breaking the stillness. The city had settled into its late-night rhythm, but the memory of the road and the figures that they had passed earlier lingered in his mind. The taxi driver was very talkative at first, chatting casually about the late hour, the roads, and the neighborhoods, trying to keep the mood light. Arif replied politely, but his mind kept drifting back to the back road, the cemetery, and also the tall woman in the hijab. The taxi turned off the main street and entered a narrow alleyway, an older part of the neighborhood that was lined with small houses, patches of forest, and even a pagoda on one side. The street lights cut through the darkness and illuminating the small trees and the occasional flickering street light. The quietness of the alley felt different from the main road somehow. There were shadows who seemed darker and deeper, silence that felt heavier, and an unease that made Arif tense in his seat. As then they drove past the pagoda, he noticed something that made his stomach turn. The driver, who had been talkative moments ago, suddenly fell silent. The calm energy in the car shifted into something heavier. Arif turned to look at the driver, expecting a glance or a response, but the man's eyes were fixed straight ahead, unblinking with strange intensity. It was as if something unseen had captured his attention, holding him in a gaze that was both hypnotic and terrifying. Arif followed the driver's stare and noticed the figure on the side of the road. It was the same man in the office uniform again, walking slowly, moving with a purpose that was both deliberate and also unnatural. The car began to slow, and Arif realized with a jolt that the driver seemed to be easing the vehicle closer to the figure, as if he was about to stop. Fear rooted him to his seat, and he reached out, shaking the driver's thigh, raising his voice to break the trace. The driver snapped out of it immediately, blinking and looking at Arif with confusion and alarm. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked. Arif swallowed hard and said, "No matter what, if you see a person in front of the car, just keep going. Just run into him. Don't stop. Don't let them in." The man in the uniform continued to walk past the car, moving slowly, then seemingly dissolving into the wall of the pagoda. Arif exhaled shakingly and feeling the tension ease just slightly, though the airy energy of the alley remained. He told the driver that they would talk more once they are safely out of this neighborhood, and the ride continued in an uneasy silence until Arif reached his apartment. As the taxi came to a stop in front of the alleyway to Arif's apartment building, the driver parked silently and the tension in the car still lingered, heavy and unshakable. Arif hesitated for a moment before opening the door, then leaned slightly toward the driver and asked softly, "Can I ask you something? About the ride, what did you see back there?" The driver blinked, almost startled that Arif noticed. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face as if he needed to steady himself. "I wasn't going to tell anyone," he admitted, his voice low, "because I didn't think anyone would believe me, but yes, I saw them. There was a woman in the hijab. She kept appearing on the side of the road, in different places. First on a bench, then behind a light pole, and then sometimes even on a tree branch. Every time she was watching the car. I couldn't look away no matter how hard I tried." Arif felt the chill creep up his spine, and for a moment, the alleyway behind the taxi seemed darker, heavier, as if the presence of the driver had described still lingered, watching both of them. Arif decided to tell the taxi man about everything that happened since the beginning until the end, and about the man in the uniform. However, the taxi replied that he didn't see the man in the uniform. He only saw the woman in the hijab. And so Arif decided to call it a night and go back to his apartment. He thanked the man quietly and stepping out of the car, and as he walked towards his building, the silence of the alleyway pressed in around him, and even though the taxi was gone, the feeling of being observed did not leave him at all. After leaving the taxi, Arif walked towards his apartment, and his footsteps echoing softly in the narrow alley. The night was quiet, and the city's usual hum was replaced with a heavy and almost tangible silence. Every shadow seems to stretch unnaturally, and the faint glow of scattered streetlights flickered in a way that made his skin crawl. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and tried to focus on a familiar road, telling himself that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. And then he felt it, a presence behind him, subtle but unmistakable. Each time he quickened his pace, the sound of soft, deliberate footsteps seemed to follow. He didn't dare to look back. His mind raced with images from the night. The woman in the hijab, the man in the office uniform, and the hypnotic gaze of the taxi driver. With every step, the alley seemed narrower and the shadows deeper, and the feeling of being watched grew heavier. When he finally reached the entrance to his apartment building, he saw the security guard he knew well. The man looked up immediately and noticing the paleness on Arif's face, and the tension in his movement as well. "You look exhausted," the guard said, his tone gentle but concerned. "What happened? You look like you had seen something." Arif tried to smile, shaking his head. "It's nothing, it's just a long night," he replied. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that the alley behind them was still alive with the memories of the figures that had been following him. The guard studied him carefully, suspicion and concern mingling in his eyes, but Arif didn't elaborate. He knew it was something he had to deal with alone, or at least for now. Arif took the elevator up to his floor, his footsteps quiet on the corridor carpet, and finally entered his apartment. He closed the door behind him and tried to relax, telling himself he was safe now, that the wall of his apartment would keep anything outside from reaching him. He went through his nightly routine, washing up and setting down his bag, all while feeling the weight of the night slowly pressing against him. He crawled into bed, hoping for a deep sleep that might erase the memory of the road, the cemetery, and the figures that had followed him so persistently. And eventually, exhaustion won over, letting him drift into a fragile, uneasy sleep. Though a small part of him remained alert, as if the shadows of the night were still lingering just beyond the window. Next morning, Arif woke up to the soft light of the morning filtering through his curtains, and the events of the night still heavy in his mind. The silence of his apartment felt almost unnatural, the quiet after such a tense night making him feel uneasy. He got dressed and decided to go downstairs to check in with the security guard, someone he trusted and often shared small chats with him. As he stepped into the lobby, the guard looked up immediately, his expression sharp and concerned. "Arif, you look pale. What happened last night? You didn't come down until now," he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Arif hesitated, trying to choose his words carefully. "It was just a very long night," he said, still trying to calm the lingering unease in his chest. The guard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Long night? You know what? Last night I saw strange things outside of the building," he said quietly, lowering his voice as if afraid someone might overhear. "I noticed a man in a uniform, an office uniform, walking past our building multiple times. He kept pacing back and forth, stopping and looking towards your apartment. And then there was a woman wearing a hijab, and she did the same thing, walking back and forth, sometimes stopping to watch, sometimes talking to the man. They were there for hours until the sun came up." Arif nodded slowly, his mind racing to connect the dots. The road, the cemetery, the taxi ride, and now the figures outside of his apartment. Everything from last night seems to converge at that moment. He thanked the security guard quietly, though he felt no comfort, only the lingering weight of the night's events pressing against him. After that conversation, Arif went back to his apartment and tried to continue his morning routine. He moved about as normally as he could, but every sound from the street below, every flicker of light through the window, reminded him that the night's presence had not fully gone. It lingered, patient and silent, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the events from the night before were far from over. After the unsettling night, Arif finally met up with his bandmate Hafiz to piece everything together. They sat quietly, and the tension between them heavy but unspoken, as if they tried to process what had happened. Arif spoke first, recounting how, after their drive, he had experienced the taxi ride home. After Arif finished, Hafiz shared his side of the story. He said, "I saw them too, the woman in the hijab and the man in the office uniform. When I got home, it was strange. Usually my girlfriend would come down to open the gate for me. But that night, when I called her, she asked, 'Who did you bring home?' I was very confused because I came home alone." She said she could see inside the car, and yes, it was empty inside, but she also saw people on a roof and sitting in the trunk. She asked, "Who are they?" Hafiz felt a chill that went down his spine as he remembered it. "I didn't know what to do," he continued. "I ended up driving to a neighbor's house, someone I was not on good terms with, and thinking, if they want to enter a house, fine, let them go there, not my house. Then I opened the door and ran to my house as fast as I could. Later, when I told my parents, they said it happened because I acknowledged them on the road, and that's how they were able to follow me home. They advised me to go to the pagoda and make merit, sending good deeds to the ghost so they wouldn't need to follow me home." Arif listened attentively, realizing that the strange, hypnotic pull, the repeated appearances of the figure, and the weight of being followed all fit together. It was not just fear, it was acknowledgement. The ghost didn't need to harm them. They simply followed those who noticed them, and that night, both Hafiz and Arif had seen too much. After sharing their experiences, Hafiz and Arif decided to tell the other two bandmates, who had fallen asleep during the ride. Once everyone was together, the four of them went to the local temple to make merit, offering food and prayers and good deeds for the spirits they had encountered. The temple was quiet in the early morning, and the soft chanting of the monks blending with the rustle of the leaves and the distant call of the birds. As they participated in the rituals, the weight of the previous night slowly lifted. The presence that had followed them, patient and silent, seemed to withdraw, as if acknowledging their offerings and finally letting go. After the visit, nothing unusual happened again. The two bandmates who had slept through the drive had never seen the spirits, and now they understood why. By sleeping, they had not acknowledged the ghost's existence, so they had remained unaffected. But for Hafiz and Arif, the memory remained, a reminder that some presents only follow those who see them, and sometimes respect and acknowledgement are enough to send them away. After that night and their visit to the temple, life slowly returned to normal for the band. The roads no longer felt heavy with unseen eyes, and the unsettling presence that had followed them faded into the memory. Hafiz and Arif never forgot what they had experienced, but the terror was tempered by understanding. They realized that not all spirits come with ill intention. Some linger simply because they are acknowledged, tied to a world that they cannot fully leave. In many Asian beliefs, it is said that if you think you encounter a spirit, you must not let them know that you can see them, because acknowledgement gives them a connection to the living world, and they may follow you home, lingering until something is done to ease their rest. That was exactly what had happened to Hafiz and Arif. They had seen, and by seeing, they had invited the presence to follow them until they made merit and sent good deeds to the spirits. The two bandmates who had slept through the drive never saw anything, and for them, it was just a strange story. From that day on, the band approached their travels and performance with a quiet respect for the unknown, understanding that some roads, some figures, and some glances are not meant to be ignored. And though the woman in the hijab, the men in the office uniform, and the airy back roads belong to another world, their story remained a chilling memory, a ghostly reminder of the thin line between the living and the unseen. Even now, after that night had passed, Arif sometimes thought back to that road, the silent eyes watching from the shadows and the way acknowledgement had drawn them near. It was a night that they would never forget, a night when the ordinary world brushed up against the extraordinary, living only whispers, glances, and the quiet sense that some things are best treated with caution, respect, and a little distance. And that is the end of the story. I will see you all in the next story.